How much longer? Nathan, 2 minutes? 3 minutes?
For me?
Actually, are we back? Are we good? Okay, welcome back to work meeting. We're gonna continue with.
So I wanna ask, do you want a quick update on where we're at with the franchise moratorium? Cause we did put a moratorium in place, cause our ordinance has some holes in it. It's up to council if you want it, or if you want it next meeting, or.
To address the
Sure, I would appreciate an update
Sure,
because the
Because I
inference from the comments made in our meeting was that somehow we're doing something untoward or
Yeah.
unfair or anti-competitive. And that's frankly
say the comments made, I felt.
not true.
Incorrect.
Yeah, so as you know, the city controls the right of way. And when companies want to utilize the right of way, they need to get some type of an agreement from the city. Typically, they're franchise agreements. Several months ago, back in May, we presented a pending ordinance before you so we could fix some of the issues between broadband, telecom, and cable. And all three of them have different regulations from federal laws. Broadband doesn't hardly have any federal regulations, which is a problem because a lot of these companies offer multiple services. There's different taxing rates, but depending on what you fall under. And so we wanted to have a more robust ordinance, and people did come in that we would know how to apply these various applications. So that's where we're at. We're in the process. I've consulted with an outside attorney that all they do is telecom from a New York-based firm to help us make sure we have a good ordinance. So we're still at the beginning phase of drafting that, just because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But that's kind of where we're at, and so just so you know, are there any questions with where we're at or what we're doing, or?
Put a moratorium in place for how long?
So the longest we can do it is 6 months. And I believe that the council made the decision in May.
So, did he submit an application a year plus ago?
I don't know if we had a formal application ever submitted. They just said that they wanted a franchise agreement. And we had presented to the council that a template franchise agreement that applicants can come in and it was all this, it would treat them all the same. But the problem is that's a telecom franchise agreement. What if they're a hybrid? So it didn't really fit. But I don't know, and Blake or might be able to, if Redline?
Oh, I thought he said something.
Center.
He said
He said Centaway, but
The only one I remember is Redline.
Redline is, I think there's some DBAs and things like that.
I don't think he submitted one. He hit me up at the farmer's market.
He just said it, he submitted one a year ago.
No, he said All West. He's referring to All West, cause
All
he
West already
is.
has
Oh,
it.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
They
that's,
can go tomorrow.
the challenge is that, my understanding is that if you are a telecom provider that provides, you know, a whole litany of services, right? You're doing telephone, you're doing cable television, you're doing, you can put all of that through the public utility, and we have, our franchise agreement covers that and covers how much they would pay. However, there's a loophole that if you are only providing just broadband, our ordinance didn't have a tax or a fee that they would have to pay in order to use those things. And so they're trying to get around having to pay that. The consequence of that is being only an internet provider doesn't give you the same access rights to the public right of way as the other telecommunications things do. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the public utility easement, only public utilities can go in there.
Right.
So that's gonna be your power lines, your telephone lines. These type of franchise agreements are a little bit different because they're not technically a public utility.
Right.
Cable, broadband, telecom, any of that. So they have to get permission to get in our right of way as opposed to the public utility easement, which is typically on private property. So, but yeah, there's a mix of what do these companies actually provide? They might be licensed as a telecom provider. Oh, and by the way, we also provide broadband. And how do we figure out what taxing schedules? Do we tax them under the telecom laws, which is 3.5%? Or, Google's only willing to pay like 2% or something like that?
Right.
So trying to figure that out is very complicated because there's so many federal laws that apply.
Yeah, agreed, and I just think it's important for our public to understand, for the past 2 years plus, we have been working our butts off to try and solve telecom, and none of these providers wanted to come in before COVID. None of them wanted to come in during all the times when our residents were at home needing better services. None of them wanted to come in until we as a city announced our plans to start moving forward, and now they're throwing a fit saying, well, now you're trying to keep us out. And that is such a disingenuous argument, and it's frankly offensive that the council gets called out for anti-competitive things when none of these companies wanted to pay a penny to serve our underserved residents.
But a lot of these companies are going at the easy, quick streets, right? Not build out the whole system like we're
Right,
looking
they
at.
want to go to certain areas and not every area, and we can't necessarily stop that, and I'm not opposed to that. Like, I don't care if you want to come in and do whatever. But the idea that somehow we're trying to prevent broadband service in our community is such antithetical to what we're actually trying to do. And our moratorium isn't a prohibition about it, it's trying to write the ordinance so that
Do it
can
the right
happen,
way.
right? And it's just, I mean, I understand they're frustrated, but trying to call us out for being anti-competitive or,
Come in and make baseless
yeah,
accusations
it's just,
and make threats.
yeah.
That's what he did.
Well,
That's
he
not
can
gonna go
come
very
every week, it's fine.
Yeah.
And I think they were working with the city as far as trying to get this in place, and it does take a lot of time, and my turnaround on some of these agreements are slower than they should be, depending on what is
Well, you're
going
not
on.
busy at all.
No,
We
I'm
don't
not.
have anything else going on,
It's
right?
not like I've been spending the last several months fighting a condemnation action, but,
And now it's cost us more money. on
so
the last one.
I understand that they tried, and ultimately the moratorium came in place, and they're upset with that decision, cause that just pushes it at minimum out another 6 months.
Sure, and
Well,
So
even
I
less
can
so,
appreciate
that
frustration
started
with
in
the
May,
decision.
So he's got a couple months, he's only got 4 months left in this. It'll all be okay.
Okay, we appreciate it, Bob.
That was your 4 minutes, I'm sorry.
Now your time's up.
I'll go as fast as you want. Alright, so we were partway through this, so I apologize, Councilor Warren, we're partway
Listen to a
through
lot of it on the way.
Okay. Fleet. This was a question, so this is one of our most significant expenses. So when we look at PD, it's personnel, but fleet is probably our second most significant expense after personnel, is just maintaining the fleet. Over the last 4 years, I think it's like a 40% increase in vehicle costs, and that may, in the last 2.5 years or something, it's been a very steep, as everybody saw with vehicles. A lot of ours were canceled, but we're seeing a lot of pressure in the fleet world. And that's across the board, all makes, models, types. So one of the questions is, why do we use the F-150? We'll get to that, but with our mountains and our interface area here, our patrol cars need something that will get up there. There are, I think, I was told UPD used some Durangos.
Chevy, yeah, Chevy, I had a Durango at one point, I
Left their
ripped bumper
bumpers up
covers
there.
off it.
Chief said he left his bumper up in the mountains. Hopefully he picked it up and
Did
for
it.
somebody to shoot later.
Threw it
But,
back.
so there is some things that we're looking at, okay, we have a unique city here. So, right now, it's that F-150, the F-150, be really clear, this is not one of the police pursuit rated F-150s, this is pretty much a standard F-150 that we then upfit, which allows us on the back end to sell it, have a wider market. So, because by policy, we're not doing high-speed.
We'd be an agriculture building.
So this one works for us. Radio is always faster than driving. It works. Evaluation, so we are looking specifically where we have other areas, what kinds should the detectives have? As a fleet, our maintenance people are most familiar with Fords. If you read the studies, the cheapest one to have would be Toyota. But they have a fleet program, but they don't really have a fleet program because they sell all the cars they make, so they don't. But we're very familiar with Ford, which I think also leads to all of our public works equipment. Most of those are Fords, although we do have some, freight, we have a Freightliner and a couple other things. Some of our bigger, but, so right now, we are looking at what would be more appropriate for detectives. And one of the just key things that has to happen is we have to figure out how to extend the life of the vehicles because of their cost. You'll see here in a model that Trevor's been helping us with, it's significant. When we put that vehicle in there, those number of vehicles, it has probably your after personnel, your next biggest impact on your bottom line, what's happening.
Guys gotta learn how to drive better. You gotta extend the life. Come on.
Yes.
Well, and part of that was from a planning standpoint, I think we used to be at 4 years, we probably need to plan for at least 5, maybe 6 years of operations of those vehicles. It's not just years, just like we talked, there's other statistics that we use on them. But making sure that we have, now that these are all vehicles that I think these are all vehicles we've owned the entire time, we're no longer we had a fleet of UPD vehicles where we didn't have any maintenance history. So,
Those are
and
fun, right?
those were all sold this last.
I have a handful left. Yeah, but they'll be out the door soon. But we're finally getting to the point where the ones that are coming up for rotation are ones that we purchased in 2018.
That's good, cause then we have all the history.
We have all the maintenance records, we know all the equipment that's been in them, we know everything that's happened to them.
Yeah, so we're not, and there was a challenge with the F-150s and their turbos at one point. I think Ford has fixed
It's
that.
been corrected, but it was a fight for a while.
I'm happy to email this to you.
So,
So that's that fleet. Now let's talk about how this all puts together in some of our modeling here. So with the fleet, one of the challenges with fleet is when you replace your cars and then you have these spikes and hills and valleys, right? One year you don't buy as many, how do you budget for that? So working with finance, we're going to create, I don't know, we'll call it a rolling stock fund or some sort of vehicle replacement fund where we'll try and make a standardized payment every year, transfer the money over there every year so that we know. So if we figure out how many cars we should be replacing to keep on a schedule, we'll be transferring that money when we buy it, we'll use those funds. If we don't buy as many, those monies will stay there. When we sell these cars, we'll push that money back in there for future vehicle purchases. It should smooth out, help smooth out that so we don't see those highs and lows. One of the real challenges we have this year with our budget, it's balanced, we don't have any vehicles in it. We bought all those in '23. General fund bought those, but so we have a year where we're not buying, but next year when I have to go buy vehicles. So
Part of that was created from the shortage, though, right? We couldn't get vehicles
correct.
to buy them, and
So
so it was kind of an anomaly.
yeah, I mean, it was an anomaly that we bought them last year. We bought them because the cars we had ordered in '21 didn't show up till this year. The cars we were afraid weren't going to show up, so we ordered them and they showed up right away. So the crystal ball was not working really well, but we have them. I think most of them are still probably sitting in the parking lot waiting to be upfitted because that's its own challenge.
Yeah, we're about halfway through. Upfitting is our greatest slowdown right now because of some of these market demands. Our upfitters that we're using are seeing labor shortages and difficulty with accessing equipment, and all of that is delaying the timeline, so.
So one thing, the years may be the same, but they're all going into service. It's kind of staggering them, so that may help us with that.
So Nate, tell me, and it may be, I've read so much on this. So this year, we're not putting any, right now, 700,000, there's nothing going into this vehicle fund you're talking about.
Correct.
But long term, do we want that, is that number 700,000 moving?
So I will show you just a second, we can show you that number, or Trevor can read it to us.
In a minute, okay.
So if you put more resources in here, the first one that, and when we originally talked about this, that 6.5% that I had recommended was really to kind of cover this. It's about 575, 600,000, was to cover what I thought fleet was going to need. If you add more money, then I would say right now, this, I see in our police calls, we go to the same houses. Sometimes you'll read in there, we've been to this house 6 times in 4 days. And it's mental health issues. Having somebody who could follow up with them on the phone the next day to, or make sure they're going, trying to get hooked up with services who can help them. As a society, we are asking police officers to do things that they're not trained for. They're available, so they go. And we're dealing with mental health issues, but I told the chief, it's one of the things, I heard Chief of Fort Collins said, he said, kids out of the academy at 16 weeks of training, they're supposed to go out in the middle of the night and solve a societal problem that we have never solved with their 16 weeks of training. When they do it wrong, we get mad at them. And that's one of the challenges. So having somebody who, as a resource to them, that would be probably my second.
Not sworn, just a mental health professional, right?
So we had one, so that position is currently vacant. We said we would just leave it unfunded. That's why I put that. Eventually, our fund balance, these got somehow, I don't know when if you change the font, if you change my order of, what officers would be. So in order, let's
It's all your fault, John.
I would say, at some point, we're going to trigger here. And then we've talked about, every year we usually don't spend down to zero. We would recommend that we start, if we have those savings, we start sticking those into a fund balance. We need.
Need to plan ahead.
Correct, and we were, I'm looking at Kyle here, cause we're going to bring you a fund balance policy, and is it 2 months?
2 months
For these funds? So that's our recommendation, is that you would have at least 2 months worth of expenses in a reserve for the, when you have to dip into it for catastrophe or whatever.
And there's no fund balance currently.
There is not a fund balance currently.
I don't think we're gonna get to that. Right.
And you may not, that's why I said, this is one when I'm looking at it, it's down on the bottom, we need it.
But could we
And
just slowly?
you're
build
welcome
up?
to,
Yeah, it's just, I mean, not to derail all this, but one of the things that I've been talking about as far as wanting a comprehensive long-term plan, that has to be part of it. The way government budgets in general, whether it's a city, school district, police department, it's here's the budget and we spend it all. And then next year inflation happens and other things and hey, we need more money and we get more money and we spend it all. Well, if we have a budget that lines those things out, whether it's fleet, here's what we're putting away for fleet this year, we might not spend it all this year, but we know we're going to have that rotation, there might be delays, and we have that budgeted for those expenses. We can do the same things with other expenses, right? We don't have to spend every penny, we can set those things aside. We have some extra money, we could hire one more officer, but does that do what we need as far as the schedule and the span and control? We really need 3 or 4 officers to do that, so we can bank that money year to year, and then we have enough to hire the 3 or 4, we do it the right way. Just as an example, right?
so, this is staff's recommendation, I think, on priorities, you would always, just a recommendation, you can always do what you want, right? That's what you get to decide, but in my thought, these are the things we have to cover, Chief calls these kind of force multiplier types.
Got it. I wanna ask a question about the fleet situation. I was appreciative, so I'm gonna give some kudos for the work that was done, and then some criticism about it too. So the quantifiable issues that were put in there regarding, ground clearance and performance of resale rates and all that kind of stuff, those are great, points, and helpful for understanding why we choose certain things. There were some more ambiguous statements that made, that weren't supported by data that, I'm concerned were, I don't wanna say omitted, cause that sounds intentional, let's just say that were not included, in the information provided. that, I think are important for us to be making, or looking at as part of this decision-making. So for example, the idea was if we have a mix of vehicles, we'd have to have parts for two. That's true, but you'd need less parts for one. So there's no, it's just saying, well, we'd have to have double the storage because we'd need twice as parts. Well, no, we'd need half the storage for these cars and half the storage for those cars. I know that's not exactly how it works, but there wasn't any quantifiable measure of cost impact there. For example, there was not a measure of, it wasn't detailed saying the resale rate at 3 years and 100,000 miles is this, at 4 years and 130,000 miles it's this, and that difference is only $2,000, but an extended warranty is $3,000. So it's better for us not to spend it and just do the extra or something like that. That wasn't in there. Another thing that I was concerned about is that it said the resale for F-150s is higher, but it didn't say what the comparative starting cost is, and if the cost is lower and the resale is lower, but they're the same percentage, we should be going with the cheaper option, right? It's not clear that an F-150's rate of depreciation is slower than the rate of depreciation of another vehicle. That wasn't
Wasn't that
quantified.
in that other report?
So I will say, these are all excellent points, and this, I think this is our first time to really try to quantify
Right.
why we're doing something, and I don't know that those other fleet vehicles are out. Having run a city with a mixed fleet, had both GM and Ford products, it wasn't the end of the world.
Right.
It was, you know, the mechanics, they all figured it out. They didn't seem to.
Well, and this is the one time really, can I speak to my career? It's some, but
Yeah.
coming from this kind of, you know, in the hose world, if you will, you try to, it is about, if everything's got the same belt, if everything's got for, you know, the same belt or the same, you know, maybe it's a coolant hose or something. You're not doubling up on the inventory. You will double up on the inventory by having two manufacturers. You'll double the inventory because you're gonna have, because you don't keep, the point with having one fleet is you're only keeping one coolant hose, for example, right? You're not keeping a
understand it,
coolant hose and a coolant hose.
But you're gonna keep a certain number of coolant hoses based on the size of your fleet. And so if half
Not
of your fleet is
necessarily.
F1, well,
No, and that's what I'm saying, not necessarily, because it's the same one, so you just keep it in stock, you use it, somebody comes in and restocks it. If you got somebody that does a vendor managed inventory, they come in and restock it. So I'm saying it's not, you're not,
totally fair enough, but that's still such an ambiguous statement that it's true, but it's not quantified.
well, but it can be, I'm saying, I've seen
Yeah.
reports coming from my industry, that is, almost everybody goes, and it's not Ford shipping, like in my world, it was the Komatsu, everybody's a Komatsu, or everything's a, because it is that, there are studies that show one manufacturer is a cost savings.
And so that's why I said it's not the end of the world to have a mixed fleet, but we're at a starting point, with that look. You know, here's, okay, we're using the F-150, that's why I put, at this time, we have them, that's what we have out there. I think before we order our next ones, we'll look at, one, the GM fleet. You know, those are your, really, you have your GM and your Ford are your two users that you can do. Again, Toyota doesn't really play. Total, and often when you're buying, you're trying to look at total cost of ownership, the studies that are out there, which one is cheaper. Some of those studies, when you have your own fleet, your own maintenance, it's hard to those don't necessarily work apples to apples, but they do
Sure.
tell you that in general, this vehicle costs this much per mile, this one costs this. The Toyota is, I think, the last study I saw on any of them, GM and Ford are within like a penny, and the Toyotas are like 8 cents cheaper per mile for their vehicles. Now, it really does go to how much you're paying and can you buy them, and in fleet, we buy through a state contract, and I don't believe Toyota is even an option.
And again, that's totally fair, but if we're really gonna do fleet analysis, and again,
Quantify
there's,
it.
yeah, for example, should we be getting the 2.7 liter EcoBoost or the 3.8 liter EcoBoost? Should we be getting the V8 or should we be getting a diesel? Should we be getting the EcoDiesel? Should we be getting the Lightning trucks? I mean, there's no, we shouldn't, but what I'm saying is there's a whole lot of configurations and options that are available at different cost points that have different life cycles, that have different reliability factors, that have different cost of maintenance. And just assuming that the Ford F-150 is the best vehicle based on the information that was provided, it's not supported. I'm not saying that what's done wasn't helpful and meaningful. I just can't say that based on the information I have, that it's clear that that's the best choice.
And so, like I said, for right now, that's what we have sitting out here. When we're not buying any this year, when we go to buy, we need to do some work, because we need to be looking at the true cost of ownership. Police vehicles they're not supposed to idle all the time, but they do idle, right? They're in an accident, they're running, there's some idle miles you have to track.
Right,
It's a fair point.
That's a
that
question, like,
there
why
may
aren't
be
they,
other
why aren't
vehicles.
they diesels? Right, diesels can idle for a lot longer, and the longer they idle, the better they operate.
But they're also 10 grand more.
Sure,
So is
but
that cost
you
of
can
ownership?
quantify
And maintenance
financially
too.
saying they cost more, but we can get 150,000 miles out of it instead of 100,000. Or the maintenance is less, or the parts are more or less, or, you know what I mean? It's just not.
Why not
Same
support-
issue I've had with a lot of other decisions we've made in the past. It's, well, I think that's right, or it feels right, or that's the best we've got right now. And when we're talking about a tax increase, and we're talking about such a substantial portion of money in the budget, I think we need to do a pretty careful analysis, and I don't think that it's an unreasonable set of parameters for us to be evaluating.
And I agree, like I said, for the purpose of the modeling, because we're not buying any this year, Cody put together, I think, Deputy Chief Stromberg did a good job starting to outline.
Yep.
There needs to be that look of, again, that ownership, what do we do? A lot of cities are on Ford. I will tell you, my last city we were on Ford. The reason being is because GM closed their dealer. So we went only with Ford, because we had to deal with the dealer. But in Colorado, we had a mixed fleet, right? It was whatever was cheaper at that. I had Dodges. I had all the vehicles, and we had a lot more inventory. And the mechanics would tell you they had their favorites and they had those they hated. But we
Sure,
also
right.
had our own our fire department, and we maintained those too. Those are really good.
And look, there's
I
There's
agree
alternatives to
with you.
everything. There's contract maintenance things, and that's, you get less service, right? You don't control everything, and there's all these alternatives, and I'm not saying that the information provided wasn't valuable or that it was necessarily incorrect, right? Because it's just not, we missed an opportunity to have better data that supports that this is the right conclusion.
So I will say it's still a work in progress.
Fair
So
enough.
before we buy them again, so I think this was probably our first attempt to
Totally.
to write down why we were doing what we're doing. The fair points, again, I've been in mixed cities, you can do them. For some reason, Ford has a pretty big hold in the West. I think back east, you see more of the GM products. In New York, you will see every make and manufacturer in their police cars. Their Toyota RAV4s running, traffic, there's one of those little smart cars. I sent a picture to the chief and said, maybe we get these. I just can't see Officer Fairbanks fitting in there.
Yeah. And so I just put it this way, you did awesome. The data you had in there was great. And I want to give props for the effort that's put into providing so much information. And I'm not saying we shouldn't make the decisions that we're at right now. I would just like, on a go-forward basis, I'm trying to give some additional points that I think are important for us to make better decisions going forward.
Yeah, and that was really the purpose of the study, right? Is we didn't have any of that information before.
Right.
Trevor and I had really just started scratching the surface of compiling this data, and because of the compressed timeline for the truth and taxation hearing, maybe there were a lot of things that we wanted to put in this that we couldn't get done in time.
Sure.
So I think the intent of this is always to be more of a living document and a reevaluation, and not necessarily we're doing this and these are the reasons why. It was more of a, we believe the decisions that were made are in line with industry best practices. However, we're gonna continue to evaluate as we go forward. And the reality is, particularly when we talk about the world of telematics and data and some things that are really on the cutting edge, we're gonna have much better data moving forward than we do even today. And that was the intent, was that we continue to revisit this, maybe even every cycle, to make sure that what we're doing is in line with what the expectations are. So it was never, I apologize if that wasn't clear in the report, it was never a, this is what we're doing and this is the reasons why. It was more of a, how did we get to this point, and do we think that those decisions are justifiable in terms of industry best practices and standards? And the conclusion there is yes. However, the intent is always to reevaluate and revisit what is the best way to maximize the expenditure of taxpayer dollars and the highest and best return to the taxpayer for their investment. And that's the intent moving forward. So that this analysis, as Trevor and I talk about parameters and metrics and things that we're gonna continue to add into it, was always intended to evolve. It just got a little compressed because of our timeline.
Well, and that's the way
Digitization,
that
so,
I was looking at it, is that this is a good start to kind of tell us what we have and where we're at, that then allows us to ask those further questions going forward. Because we're not asking ourselves right now, should we make a fleet change or a major sea change? That we're asking for information. To me, this was the beginning of that. This is kind of what we have and how that looks. And where there's more questions to ask, and I agree, we need quantifiable data to support whatever decision we make, but that's not the decision we're making necessarily right now. To me, it's part of that comprehensive plan. To me, when I looked at this, the overarching question that kept coming back to me, on one, I'm a GM guy, and one of my kids actually asked me this weekend if they bought a Ford if I disowned them. Probably.
Finally, I got time to that kid, probably.
Right?
Get him a
But,
gun.
I mean, when it comes to this, like, to me, it's that data decision, right? Is there a clear savings long-term? You should be able to gather some of that and make those comparisons, but that's something you do over time. What I kept looking at is the F-150 and the expedition thing. So, we have lots of different positions in the department, right? So does a detective need an F-150? Right? Does an administrator need an expedition? Right? Are there other models that are more economical for that position? Like, I think to me, that was the first question I think we need answers. Are there saving, regardless of the
Yeah, I mean, a
manufacturer?
Ford Edge isn't sexy, but it's all-wheel drive, right, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if your job does not involve interfacing with the mountain, and I would say that there are a few of them like that we have, but you do need to get around and take statements and take pictures of the stolen property and all those sorts of things, but you don't need a high clearance vehicle. Like, there's gotta be other ways that we can save.
You're exactly right, and that's why that's included in one of the limited recommendations that we made. That's one of the very first things we identified as we started looking at this, is that very thing, that there are different job descriptions that maybe have different requirements. So to place ourselves in a box is probably not the most economical decision to make.
We're not buying any
Recognizing
vehicles
that-
this budget cycle, so it's like, it's
But-
not a
but
critical
they're
thing,
good
but going
points is-
forward, we should,
Yeah.
I'd like to see
how-
more of that.
And they
If we-
did admit they were gonna do that,
Yeah.
Sure, well, recognizing that no two detectives are created equal, right? I might have a detective who's assigned to SWAT who has to carry extra gear and equipment that might need the F-150 as opposed to that, but that should be made on an assignment by assignment and a case by case basis as we move forward. We're not so large in our fleet requirements that we can't do that on a case by case basis as vehicles come up for replacement.
So the one thing we are doing, and I'm not 100% sure why, but I think it's a good decision, is we've stayed away from the police specific,
Right.
the Interceptor and their Explorer. They're great vehicles, they're fine vehicles. They are so police specific, you cannot sell them.
Right. And that's a quantifiable thing, that the resale value is so diminished compared to this model. This model's clearly better. Totally get that. That's a meaningful data point, right? But saying that their resale value is higher than their resale value, that's not a useful number.
Starting points.
Right, because we didn't evaluate their starting points and the rate of depreciation over time,
And I think that's some of that
Right.
understanding, that true cost of ownership, which should take that into account, right? What is it actually
So we'll do that because those bids change every year. When we look at it, you can see, okay, well, last year, this was true. This year, because things have changed, this is true.
Right.
So they're both true, there's just at different times, and so that is something that we have to vet every year. What is available, and what are those pricing at that time?
Yeah.
Change everything.
Because we do
And,
the.
and all
the
things
state
being
pricing.
equal, the police should choose what they think is best, right? If all things are equal, like you like this vehicle better than this vehicle, great. There's no cost difference, there's no ownership, great, make your choice. But if they're not equal, we should understand that. And if there's a difference in performance versus a different in price, there's cost benefit analysis of that stuff, right? And
There is a chart in the report that details our starting point purchase for Ford, GM or for Ford, Chevy and the Ram. To be fair, those are things we've actually been asking for from GM dealerships. Monty's been hounding them for about 9 months now, and we just barely got those price quotes back last week. So we've been asking for that data to try and help provide you with good information. It doesn't come to us necessarily as quick as it might come from our Ford dealership where we have that pre-existing relationship, so.
totally understood.
You've got something to say too.
So the reason that it takes so long, I know when you say, hey, it takes this long to get quotes, you're like, oh, that's baloney, I can call a dealership and get a quote today. The problem with it is when you're dealing with state contracts, which is what saves us the cost of that first year depreciation. So our Fords we buy, we don't experience the depreciation the first year because we're getting over that depreciation in a discount.
Right.
So when you're calling them, there's only certain windows that open on certain times that they'll release pricing for those, and they're not all in the same time. And so it gets difficult pulling quotes all the time for every vehicle that matches, right?
And that-
Just so you
I
understand.
totally understand. And that, if that means we can only get accurate information every other year, it is what it is, right? And I'm not upset about that, I'm not worried about that. I just feel like, how can I say this? And unfortunately, I think this HCC discussion is in the crosshairs right now, and so it's getting a lot of attention. This is not,
It's not just any.
this is not just about the HCC and about our police and stuff, right? Cause that, and I hate frankly that you guys are taking some bullets on this, like, cause it's not about you, right? It's just about, as a city, we've evolved to a point and we've grown to a point, and frankly, we're looking at possible tax increases and things coming down the pipe. I think our level of accountability over the dollars we spend has to increase as well.
When Teddy and I have even talked, when we were walking by, I think we were leaving one of the events, like, is it, if a vehicle phases out, is it cheaper to throw that into a parked vehicle, for a parks department? Is it cheaper to do that rather than, are we considering all of those options to where,
And I think those are,
and then down the road, again, I'm just saying, I think those are,
so sometimes you look at that, is it cheaper to, so when you're moving within a fund, it's easy. When it's owned by, so HCC bought it, it's in the general fund, but we're selling those vehicles to try and capture the money to put it back in so they can buy them. There's some of that, but I think if you have a vehicle that's not being used, when you're looking at, if your fleet is only seeing it once a year because it's the annual checkup and it's not getting enough miles even to require an oil change on its own other than the timing, then you look at deploying that vehicle someplace else and shifting things around. So,
like I said, you guys are all headed the right direction. I think we're all headed the right direction.
and I think it's a valid point. We need to become more accountable for how we're spending. We're now starting to get data. We've hired some people to help us understand what that data is telling us and when to make those decisions. Which is why on that top one, how do we extend the life? Well, part of that is understanding, again, do you buy the extended warranty? Do you not? When we were buying Crown Vics, if you were running a fleet car, you bought the extended warranty. If you were maybe doing individual cars, maybe you didn't. I was just thinking about this the other day. It's almost exactly 24 years ago. I was standing in front of the city council in Reading about their fleet program, because I was tasked to create this we call it rolling stock fund, but how are we going to do it? So it was like, geez, it's just like deja vu.
Come
It keeps
full
coming
circle.
back.
Same stuff, different
Won't
day,
go
yeah.
away, yeah. And those were all Crown Vics at that era.
And I do think Chief should have a Crown Vic. That's my vote.
I'd drive one again.
1995 Crown Vic.
Those are so fun.
With the couch in front.
And maybe with some
do it
ground
again.
light effects and we'll just lower it down.
That's a
again.
good point though, Wendy, you bring up, and I think one of the things that Cody did a good job of establishing was that, and I would argue this with any of you, we can write the sedan off as a police vehicle. One, they're not making them, generally, and two, they just don't fit police work right now, especially in our area, right?
I think even the Ford Interceptor
It's gone, yeah.
it was not popular. Everybody liked the SUV because of the storage, so they started doing that. There's still the Dodge Charger out there for some reason.
Well, it's
a
interesting
terrible
because
police car.
a city just next to us went away from that because their officers were having ergonomic issues trying to get down into the car, so they went to the trucks. And most of their officers supported that because they can step up into it. So there's a lot of other reasons other than just the mechanics. And when you mention, we'll just go to the officers and say, what makes your job easier? How does it make it easier for you to work? Which is important to me.
Yep.
And that should be a question that we weight pretty heavily.
Absolutely.
And when they say, you know, I enjoy being able to get into a SUV or a truck with all my gear on because it's easier. Now detectives, you know, they don't wear that same stuff, but.
The unfortunate
I
part.
get it. When I go rent a car, I'm not getting the compact, right? It's just, I understand. There's certain
Put on a
things
car
that are.
suit.
Yeah, exactly.
The unfortunate part about that is although they're important, I can't quantify that in an analysis.
Yeah,
So those are things that drive Trevor and me crazy because we can't put a number to it, but it's important in the terms of how we make the decision.
And it's okay to have some subjective and some objective
Yeah.
criteria, and that, I'm fine with that, right? And, you know, they come in colors that are easier for us to use, or, you know, the stock tires last longer, or, you know, whatever, I don't care. Whatever it is that is a differentiator, I just want us to at least address it. Okay, so. The horse has been kicked and beat a lot.
So I'm gonna
It's a big
jump
horse.
past this because I
Big
had it
horse.
just in case. So we've been running some models and these are updated as of this afternoon.
This is the worst.
So one of the things we're working on that I'm hoping to have at the Truth in Taxation will be the ability to actually model. If you ask us, what if we do this, we could do it right then and show you what that does. So, Trevor's been doing a ton of work, working on this model. Eventually we'd have this for our bigger funds, but we've shifted to PD right now, the HCC, to understand what happens from the funding standpoint. So this one right here is the 15, if you do the entire 15%, and only fund your police, or only fund your fleet and never hire, you can do that. It looks like that pretty much just happens, right? That the way the vehicles work and all that, we could probably, if you never add another officer again, probably not a realistic scenario, but just showing there. The next one was that with the mental health specialist, again, you could probably make that work. This one with the mental health, so all of these assume that you're doing your fleet. I should just say that. This, if you do fleet, mental, and 2 officers and 2 vehicles, what we don't have is one that shows 1 officer, 1 vehicle, but you see the first year, okay, we were trying to figure this out today. I think it has to do with some projection things going on in there, and we think we have a correction, because this is probably, should be closer to this. But you see it stays and then you start dipping under. I think if you did 1 officer, it would, again, extend a little longer, again with the 15%. So that was how we worked this. This is if you did nothing, and this is almost all primarily vehicles. So if you don't do anything, this is gonna be the vehicles. Because within this projection, we've tried to account for new growth and what that looks like. The assumption is that even if growth stays steady, it becomes a smaller percentage of your total amount. But we actually have it starting to taper off as we're moving more towards build out, whether that's too conservative or not. I think in the past, when they were looking at, you have plenty of money, it was always 7%.
I don't think that's realistic.
Which, if I have 7% this year, and we look back, our numbers we get each year has been about 500,000, 450, 500,000, but it's been pretty consistent. Every year as this goes up, that becomes a smaller and smaller percentage. And so we weren't accounting for that. So we're trying to do that in this model, and at that one, we'll show you like we can do it right now, it's.
And the growth rate
almost
at
there.
8% mortgage rates is different than the growth rate at 3% mortgage rates.
Yes. And the one thing we're trying to account for is when those new houses come in, they come in at a higher price point usually. Right now, they're still holding there, so there's some growth in their value where they're being taxed at versus some of the other homes. And there is because there's no inflationary index in Utah property tax. Typically, if you don't, this is not unusual, right? If you stay steady over time, it just erodes your ability to purchase. So this one, this is not a suggestion, but part of the question was, well, what happens if you just did, we picked 2%, I will say that was an arbitrary number. If you just grew it by 10%, now we didn't add any officers other than what we're saying here. You see that you would get headroom to do other things in there. Again, this is not our recommendation, but we're trying to show you kind of how these things interplay with one another. And then I think this just shows, and I should ask Trevor to really explain, but this just takes each of those out and shows them separately instead of all together.
And that's with the initial 15% and then 2%.
Yeah, this assumes you do the
sequential.
15. We can change that percentage in the model and show you that. We did not for this. But at that one, if you say, well, what is 7%? Well, what's 7.25%? We'll also try and have it so when you say that, well, what does that actually mean? Dollar wise, because people, I think the water went up 9%, but then you gave, it's this much per person, or per average home, so we'll try and have both those numbers. The way to calculate it quickly if you ask us.
There's one thing also about that I think I'd like to see, especially for the open house, is saying, in order to cover the cost of the mental health officer, we'd have to raise taxes this percent. To cover the cost of the vehicles, we would need this percent increase. To cover the cost of the officers, we would need this percent increase. So you can say, it would cost, we need a 4% increase to pay for this, we need a 6% increase to pay for this, we need 1% increase to pay for this.
Okay.
So that they can say, I'd advocate for, item A plus item D and not B and C, and it would add up to 5.5% or something.
Okay. Yeah, that's a interesting way. I wonder if we could have it live and they say, well, this is what it looks like if you do that. We'll see.
Because there's a dollar amount for those.
There is, I
And
know.
and a tax increase would equate to a certain dollar amount to cover a certain cost.
With council, when you say, hey, how we do it, we're working, again, right now, we're still trying to get it so it's not there's still a little bit of brute force work in here. I think we have to make sure that it's still, well, Trevor's done a great job this week making sure that when you change this number here, it flows through. It doesn't break.
And I like the charts, and I do want you to email these slides to me because it's a way to try to visualize the compounding math problem, right? So if you go back a couple of slides to where you have them all on there, when you add, if it's just vehicles, right?
Mhm.
Inflation is inflation, but it doesn't have nearly the compounding effect. We can last for a long time.
It just pulls down.
But if we start adding new people and they're compounding in factor, and that's not just inflation, it's the market adjustment for the shortage of labor, we run off the cliff really fast, right? You can add that, just one person in what was that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 4 years, you added one person in 4 years, we raise taxes again.
Actually, this one is the mental health and the 2 officers. That's what we'll run. I think a different model will be the mental health in 1 officer, 1 vehicle.
Well, I was looking at, because I'm just doing math in my head, if you do if you do vehicles and 1 person, right, those 2 together.
The purple, yeah.
Just when you start adding the people, that makes that
Correct,
problem, so
much more expensive.
So it's good, so I'm saying it's good to have this because it helps you visualize the effect of that. Because it's easy right now to say, well, let's raise it by 15% and it's only $10 a household. Well, that's today. And because you raise it $10 household now, you're gonna have to do another 15% in 4 years to pay for that compounding, inflationary increase.
Yeah. So not to complicate it, but when would you ever add a vehicle without adding a person? What would be the purpose of that?
Replacing what you have.
Like,
No, this
Well,
is
they're
the
different
fleet, this
positions,
is the
right?
fleet
Mental health is a
replacement.
different
Yeah, they don't get a vehicle,
And I'm, in my
officers get vehicles.
example there, I'm not including
So that's
new
kinda
growth
how
rate.
we're-
You can't have an officer without a vehicle.
Well, that was
an
my
additional
point,
vehicle.
is that if you're gonna have a person, you have to have a vehicle.
Wouldn't your mental health have a vehicle? No, they would use their private?
That would be the
No,
only.
Well, they don't
we
go
have-
out. They're-
Yeah, they don't travel. If they were to travel, they would
Oh.
have a line unit like if they were gonna go to training or something, we have line units for them to
Okay.
use.
They would never go to site.
Not without that's not
No.
really the program I run, and we can talk all about that
Yeah.
another day, and it's interesting to talk about, but get us
Yeah.
off track tonight.
So this last one, so I was asked, what does it look like just over time? So this assumes the 15%, correct? Was that our baseline? So we said, okay, what if you hire an officer, how often, what's the interval of you hiring additional officers, right? Just guessing, hey, this is what's happening in growth, and it was one at a time. And so you see right here, I think this is the 2 years. I'm trying to figure out. So if you hire one but don't hire another one for 8 years, you see how it kind of levels itself out in this model. And we did this afternoon, so I haven't had a whole lot of time to look at numbers, but we're trying to figure out how much does that adding and the spacing of that, what does that impact? How does that play? And this one, if you hire them every 2 years, you see your, over that time frame, so you'd hire here, then you hire here, then you hire here, and you see it just starts to go, again, as you pointed out, people are expensive. Again, you add, these all include a vehicle each time we hire them. And so this, I don't know if this one's as helpful, but we were trying to figure out and I think you had asked me this question, how does that time and when we hire start to play in? Now, again, all of these that we showed you today assume the 15% because, we just picked that. We'll have the ability, is it next Tuesday? Or 2 Tuesdays from now. If you
3%
say,
or 9%.
we'd rather do 3, or we'd rather do 9, or whatever, 15's the max. What does this, or one of these charts, what does that do? So you can start to visualize, and I actually do really like that idea of, in the open house, people can say, well, I want this, or I want that. It's, the one thing I say, it's almost impossible to say, don't replace the vehicles. Okay. In England, they walk. A lot of them walk. It's a little different kind of.
Entire
horses.
country of 35 million people.
It'll be a
is
little
less than the
longer than
size
a
of
6
Utah.
minute, response
Yeah, I
time.
said it's a different
But we can walk
world.
kids
You
to
could you could have patrol
And
in
there's trains.
in New York City. Again, it's a little different animal than what we're talking about out here.
Walking to
So.
be,
So this one is just, so when we originally started with the 6.5, this was my concern are these vehicles. We can, like I said, we're trying to figure out how do we extend those lives, so this blue line's not as tall, but it's still it's a reality that we have a lot of vehicles. Every time we had an officer, we had a vehicle. They last a certain amount of time. When I was working for South Jordan, back in 1999. I remember going to Muni Court. I can't remember why I sat through the Muni Court that day. I probably was asked to go watch something and write something. But I was in there, and the officer was asking the judge to be, because he had pulled over a tow truck for speeding, had written the ticket, and then went back and his car wouldn't start. So he went and asked the tow truck driver if he would take him to the city. So he hooked him up and helped them, jumped at whatever it is. They were driving terrible police cars. I can't remember what they were. Chevy Caprices or something.
Yeah, the,
Chevy,
I wanna say Impala, but it was a smaller.
the Impala. It was not a real police car. It was we're sort of making this a police car. It was not a
They had
Ford Tempo,
aluminum.
but it wasn't much of a step above that. And I just remember laughing, That's not a real good scene. I have had departments where we had the Chevy Impala and they kept dying on the street. And so you're looking at, you cannot have a first responder having to jump out and flag somebody down to jump their car every time they wanna go someplace or tow them. I mean, it just doesn't work. So we do have to keep that fleet up. If we want all of our fleet to function, but if frankly, if the admin car didn't work one day, it's not the end of the world. I don't, again, it was a funny moment. I wish I could remember the officer, cause I think I saw his name on one of the things where he'd retired. But it was something about, yeah, my car didn't start. Don't, be kind to this poor truck driver. Yes, he was going fast, but he gave me a lift.
What kind of car was that again? I'm sorry.
It was a Chevy Caprice. It was a pretty terrible
So
car.
before we go too far, back to Steve's comment on those individual ones, I would just ask that when you show those, don't just show this is what that cost would be today, right? So if you wanna add a mental health person, this percentage tax increase gets you them today. What's that escalating cost and how long before we have to increase taxes again to
Show the
support that
actual,
person?
you want the actual dollar numbers underneath so you
Well,
can
just
see?
that, the same graph, right? So that gets us that person today, but we will need more money to pay them later,
Okay,
right? So,
Yeah.
because what taxpayers think is that their property tax is inflation adjusted. So, and I've mentioned this to a lot of you, and I'll piggyback this on to kind of my overall concern about this stuff. I'm not concerned about this one. I'm concerned about the second and the third, where these same people who look at this and go, well, yeah, that's not that bad, it's only this many dollars today. They think that whatever problem we're trying to solve has been solved. And when you come, it doesn't matter what we tell them, without that comprehensive plan that gives them a roadmap of what to expect. It's this percentage now, and this much in a few years, and this much in a few years. Without that road, they think that we're telling them, this is all we need, we're good for a while, thanks. Right?
That's how they're used to tax increases though.
Right, so if we're showing that, I would just ask that we're showing them that increasing cost in it, so we need a mental health person. We add a mental health person now, it's only this much, it's this percentage now pays for them
Well, if you
now.
look in the, if you
But
look
in
in
a
the
couple of
chart,
years, with both inflation
It's in
and
there.
the 33%,
It's a continuing
Increase.
2% every year.
No,
Well,
no,
just-
no, but
I'm
Jared,
just-
if you look at the data that's driving these, you can see their expenditures for personnel are, there's an inflationary number going up every year.
what I'm saying is
And if
put
you
in
had
there,
more personnel, that would go up
what
faster.
I'm saying is show them that with that increase, here's when we have to raise taxes again to support that person. That's what I'm asking to put in there.
I think that, I
so
think
we
it
were
is in
trying
there.
I think we're trying to do that here,
When you
but
break
we'll
them
make this a little,
individually.
That
a
was
little
my same
clearer.
intention with the comment about the vehicles. Obviously,
broken
you're gonna replace vehicles, but you will never add an officer without a vehicle. So you might have 2 officers and 3 vehicles one year, cause you had to replace the vehicles for someone else.
so
Well,
our
let's
hope
take
is
it-
that,
yeah.
that smoothing is covering your vehicle. So that this number is covering, replacing the existing, all the existing vehicles you have.
Fleet
At their
replacement,
appropriate.
the fleet replacement.
Correct, so this is the fleet replacement,
Okay.
but whenever we add an officer, so you'll see this number jumps up, it's a little higher and a little higher, it's because we've added. And then it starts to smooth itself out, well, this is telling us how much extra you have, so it starts to come down, so, because this is where you hire the officers. We are trying to account for that. The vehicles, they, again, are very expensive. You write them off, you're trying to amortize them over time, but you still have to buy them in the year you're buying them, so.
And this chart takes in consideration no subsidy from general funds.
This is just what
It's just-
HCC does.
Correct.
This is all HCC, so there's no other funding source in there. The reason we are currently at 0, we moved 3.9 million of general fund over to
I'm just
bring
saying
us
it's
to
in
0.
Well,
Cause it had a
Fine.
negative fund
I'm
balance.
saying just tell them when it dips under, here's what the next increase would be.
I understand.
To keep
Right.
it, yeah, so I think
Like
we
you're
can,
saying,
we can figure out how to
quantify it
keep
for
it,
So just
Right.
gonna look at the
Whether-
graph,
level.
well, there it goes under, but what does that mean?
And I think that's what you're saying is that the model, you can say, if you do X% every year, we can stave off a big tax increase for 10 years. But eventually, you either need to do more
I think
each
I know
year,
yours.
or you're gonna say, we
Same.
have no increases this year, but in 4 years, we'll need another 15%, and then in
So-
another 4 years, we're gonna need 18%.
Well, yeah,
you
what I'm
know?
saying is put that there, so if we're just picking on this one, right, so it's one mental health and 2 officers, we dip below here, right, that's when we've ran out of
Year
money and we
before
need
you had
more.
to.
$100,000, yeah.
But, so quantify that, this is the percentage increase we would need at that
Oh,
point.
to bring it back to levels.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
it's
right.
not even level, you have to bring up, we did this right at the garbage district, here's your rates. How long before we run out of enough cash?
'Cause you don't wanna
to
just
do
bring
a
it back
rate
to-
increase,
But then,
right?
but then quantify it, tell me,
Right.
this is how much we would need to get us this much further, if we don't do it here, we need this
Yeah,
much.
for
It's
sure.
that much farther.
Yeah.
Do you think you're, I'm not sure, cause
Because
he's
people-
doing
people
it.
Accepted.
I think,
people-
I think I have an idea, but actually, I will say that I haven't done it for a long time and Trevor
Right.
does,
Okay,
his is
totally
much,
get what you're saying.
I do.
he's really good at it. Wow, I wish I could, I would. I
Are we
would've done
fuzzy to you, or do you know what we're asking?
I think I understand, yeah, it's Councilmember Henderson. For example, this orange bar, when we go below in 29, I guess, well, maybe this is a question, an open question, but, you know, how much higher do we want that bar to come up? Do we wanna be able to toggle that?
You wanna
want
get
it year by
break even,
year?
or do you want break even plus?
Or 5 years,
Yeah.
or.
So-
Yeah, that's the
something
question,
like
how
that.
long do you wanna come back for truth and taxation every year? Or do you wanna say, okay, we're gonna take it to this, cause this is gonna hold us for 3 years, or this is gonna hold us for 2 years?
Well, that's kind of what I just said, right, so if you just showed that one, so let's say it's $100,000, Kyle, that's 1% increase in the tax rate as we are now, right?
To bring it back to
1% is
zero?
100,000 or so,
Is about
with where we
$1
are
million,
right now.
Yeah.
So that'd be 1% that year, but that only brings us even, and we'd be right back down
Tell me if I'm wrong about
the
this.
next year. So pick a number,
Right, because
right?
inflation
Is
would
it 2%, is it
keep undermining
5%,
the
and that
next
gets us that
year.
far, and make
Yeah.
it consistent across
So I
each
think we can show it where it's flat, what it would take, like in an annual to keep it flat, and then we can show it like you're saying as well.
What if we were doing, like Sherry's saying, what if we said every 3 years, so basically in 29, you're just gonna
That's a
add,
really-
you're gonna add the boxes now, 29, 30, and 31. You're gonna add those 3 columns, cause that's where we're gonna go down, those are your costs. That's your,
bump.
does that make sense? Cause that's what you're dropping, so that difference between 29 and 30 and 30
So
and
let me
31,
put this, let me add on to
that's
that.
your,
Cause I think that there's, what you're saying is, let's say we want it to remain flat, okay? What rate would we need if we did an increase every year to keep it flat?
Right.
What rate would we need if we did it every other year to keep it flat?
Here's
What rate would it need to be if we did it every 3 years to keep it flat?
To go
And
on
I think
top of
those
that,
are, I
though,
think that's an important thing to understand, 'cause what you're saying is, if we do 10% this time, what would happen to those increases down the road? If we do 15%, does that mean smaller increases down the road for how long, right? And if we did nothing today, but we'd have to do 10% a year going forward, that, it's important to understand.
And
that-
then,
yeah.
and then you can gather that feedback at the open house,
Yeah.
even to say,
Yeah.
So,
what do you prefer, a little bit every year?
on this
or-
slide, it's the 15 and 2%, but it gives us a fund balance.
Right.
Cause sometime we're gonna need a building for these guys, right?
Yeah, that's, yeah,
Or
that's
satellite
really-
offices,
We're not
or whatever
really
that looks
gonna
like.
take that into account.
And that if we stay level or congruent, we're never gonna get a fund balance.
I
Yeah.
totally understand, but the thing is we don't have yet in as part of our comprehensive, robust plan.
Yeah.
We're only considering officer, vehicle, mental health, inflation, right? We're not
On
considering.
these charts, correct.
There is not enough
We don't have
time.
built into this increasing crime rate, if we're gonna get.
If you add
it's-
more officers, right? This is a static, you hired the officers here at whatever this model is, and that's where they grow up.
But you're gonna need
Yes.
more officers based on more population in the future, which is gonna bring, so that's not a part of this model
All the
yet.
metrics that we
Right.
just talked about,
So-
and the triggers, et cetera. I guess my overarching point is 2 things, right? So I agree with Nathan and where we started out with this a few months ago of we need to do something smaller now to kind of fix the hole, right? That we've been borrowing from general fund, and we can identify, fleet and wages and say that we need this for those things to keep it flat, but we do need to have a comprehensive plan for growth going forward and to incorporate inflationary increases in there. public does not understand how property taxes work. It's nearly impossible, once every 5 or 6 or 7 years to have them understand when this comes up. If we have a plan going forward to give them the expectation of, this is our plan, this is how it works, and you can expect these increases for these things, that's a lot easier for me to tell my neighbors, this is what we're doing and why, right? We have 13 days to decide what we're gonna do, if anything, which is why I've thrown out the idea of, we have a budget, we can do what we've been doing with the general fund for a year and figure the rest out. I'll admit, is that ideal? No, it's not. I'm open to doing something smaller, but we need to be able to tell the public, this is what we're doing and why for this, and we're working on the rest of the plan and there's more to come. That's the part people, I don't think that's not been disseminated to the public, that's what they don't understand, and it is our job to do. For the police department, what I want them to know, at least for where I'm at and the comments I've made before, we're going to grow, right? There's growth as part of that. We need to have that plan that incorporates those things. What I'm most concerned about, like I said, I'm not concerned about this tax increase, whatever it is. For the most part, the public, the majority of the public will say we support the police and it's worth whatever the dollar amount is per month. But it's the next time you come back to them without that plan, with that expectation, things that the groundwork I just said, you're gonna come back to them again in 2, maybe 3 years and say we want more, and the same people are gonna go, wait a second. You told me that fixed it or solved whatever, that's their impression, and they might even go along with it then, and then you're gonna come back again in 2 or 3 years and say, well, now we need buildings and substations and we need more of this, and that third time they're gonna say, wait a second. Enough is enough, you guys don't know what you're doing, and then there's people sitting in these seats who ran on that particular thing, and instead of getting a service level that is sustainable, right? If we do it the way it's always been done, we're just gonna fight for this tax increase and get what we can today and worry about the next one later. We'll get to the point, and you and I have talked about this, we get to the point where the public won't do it anymore. And instead of having this service level, right, that is sustainable, the public's gonna say no, and that service level drops. And then we have all the issues that everybody else has. So for me personally, I'm most concerned about sustainability of a service level, right? I'm really not that concerned about whatever the percentage is this year. I'm concerned about the plan that we present to the public, so they'll support a sustainable service level.
I'll make a comment and then devil's advocate with you. So number one is, just like we did with the school district decision tonight, just like we're talking about with the fleet, just like it's gonna be the same thing with this. We have a limited window of time to actually gather and analyze data. And we're gonna have to make the best decision we can with the data that we have right now. And that's what it is, good or bad, right or wrong, that's what we've gotta do. Okay, so let me devil's advocate with you a little bit, is that it is impossible to build a plan that will be still a valid plan in a year from now. It's impossible to, and every year you go out farther, the less accurate that is getting. And the fact that this is out 10 years, anything after 3 years is pretty garbage.
There's
it's like it's
there's a lot of
because the thing is
corrections that will take place as you get to this
because the thing
year.
is you could say, okay, we're gonna add 1,000 houses a year. Well, if rates suddenly drop and we add 4,000 houses in 1 year, all bets are off. You gotta add, 2 more officers and 2 more vehicles and 1 more of this and another administrator and, it triggers down 9.
Let me clarify.
It's not just a 5% increase to cover what our plan is, but now the plan's changed. We need a 25% increase to handle all this other stuff that's coming down, right? I mean, it's just.
What you're saying, that's the nature of a plan. When I say a comprehensive plan, I'm not saying we figure everything out and that's how it's gonna be. There's not a plan on the planet that operates that.
But what I'm saying is that the more detailed the plan is, and you give this information to the public, there's far more scrutiny of changes in those plans down the road. And it's harder to justify why you deviated from the plan rather than what the needs are at that time.
So again, clarify, when I say plan, I'm talking about the general constructs that we've discussed tonight. And having that data, and you do have to make assumptions in those plans, and like Nate, just with the strategic plan, this is something that, yeah, we have to adjust and change every year as things happen, but you have a general framework, right? That's what we need to have in place and be able to tell the public, we do have a general plan, and this is what we're modeling and looking at, and these are all of the different factors that change. But I wanna give them the expectation that we're looking out at least 10 years, and we're taking into account those things, and you're going to see, increases along the way. So is it, and that's what we need to show them, is it a small increase every year, and we have it budgeted to where that money goes, fund balances, et cetera, versus we're gonna do it every year and there's extra money to spend it, and then we're gonna need more and more and more, right? So I'm saying we need to have that framework and match the service model with the financial model and be able to show that to people so they know so they have an idea of what to expect, rather than, because before I got involved in any of this, that was my assumption, and like, you guys keep raising taxes. My property, I've told you, my property taxes increased 8% compounded a year. That's way more than inflation. And that's Harriman City, Police Department, Fire, never increased taxes, all the other entities. What the heck are they doing with all that money, right? None of them have presented a plan or know what they're doing, right? Don't communicate it. We have a unique opportunity to give people a better idea and understanding of what they own and the service they're paying for. I'm not saying we have to nail down every single detail, but we need to give them a general idea of what to expect, rather than we're raising taxes today and then we hopefully won't worry about it for 5 years, and that'll depend on the election cycle and what we think we can slip past them. For lack of a better description on all the other boards, sorry, UPD and whatever else I've been, that's the discussion. Well, we gotta do it on a non-election year. We've gotta do it when other entities haven't done theirs. We gotta slip it in when people aren't gonna really pay attention. That's how it's been done. This is the one of the few things that we can actually control and help our friends and neighbors make those decisions of where their money goes. And I don't want anyone to think that and I'll tell you, the more I said, I've solicited feedback from friends and neighbors, all of them think that, every single one I talked to was like, well, Jared, yeah, if you think that we need that, we'll support that this year. And I said, well, what if I told you that we'd have to do that again in a couple of years and again a couple of years after that? And they were like, what are you talking about? Why in the world would you do that? Right, so I'm not worried about this one, whatever it is, it's the next one and the next one, where then we run into
How many,
trouble.
like we talked about this briefly, how many emails have we gotten about this tax increase or direct communications? How many emails have you gotten about capital improvement projects that aren't done or haven't been done or been promised year after year after year? And we keep on robbing from general fund to subsidize PD.
And Jared, I get what you're saying.
I'm not saying that we should increase.
No, I know, yeah. But I think that comes to the.
I wanna be able to tell people what we're increasing it for, and a general idea of what to expect beyond this.
I thought they did pretty good in the staff report, and when they started looking at this graph even, and the graphs we have in there, is that with that 2% increase, that flows out, maybe it's only 1% each month, or each year, but in my taxation philosophy, after getting into this position, I think we should have truth in taxation every year, sorry, Jackie, but I think it should be brought to the attention, if we increase taxes over the certified rate, maybe, but going into that just as a certified rate, inflation and growth and percentage increase, I think that we should actually have, it's more comprehensive, more strategic to come to truth in taxation every year and say, hey, this is where we sit, we're a balanced budget now, we don't need a tax increase, we'll take that. But you get more public input and you say, we didn't raise taxes this year, or every 2 years, whatever that might be, but I think it's a great exercise to go through.
I think you're exactly right, but I think that the underlying driving determinant of all of this is service level, right? And that's why I appreciate the 60-60-60.
That's the plan.
Yeah, that white paper
As
is
long as
amazing.
whatever it costs to maintain that service level, right? And
That's right.
and that's the part of it that's a little bit, that's why I say the longer you get out, the less predictable it gets, right? is you don't know how fast the absorption rate of new houses is gonna be. You don't know,
The cost of vehicles.
right, the cost of vehicles, you don't know if there's gonna be another COVID and the kind of calls they're getting that they've been expecting, for a few years, it's
Or if they
this
have to
percentage
have
of calls,
some
and then all of a
different
sudden the DVs shoot up, and because it's COVID and everybody's locked in their houses going crazy, right?
Recession.
Right, a
There's all
recession,
sorts of
like
things that-
unemployment, world wars, and we, there's a big war and half our guys have to get sucked out to go on deployment somewhere, right? Like, there's all these things that can impact stuff. And so, the longer we get out, the less accurate we are. Not saying that we shouldn't try, but we just have to understand, after about 3 years, we're really
You
just
guys
guessing.
you guys are saying exactly what I'm getting at, right?
Right.
I agree that a better route to go would be more frequent, smaller increases, but we need to tell people that's the plan.
Yeah.
If we go, what I'm saying is 13 days, we go in and say, well, we're gonna do 6.5%, and it's for these things. People are gonna think that that's it.
That filled the gap, filled the
Right.
hole, yeah.
And-
Because that's
and-
what they're used
And
to.
in a very short period of time, that sustainability of the service level erodes, cause you lose public support with the increasing costs. If we come out and tell them that's the plan, rather than a 15% today, we wanna do smaller ones more frequently, and here's a general model of what we're looking at, and why we think that. That doesn't mean that we're holding to those numbers, but we're basing this decision on these general factors, right? That, to me, that's what I mean by a plan, to show them this is the pathway that we're deciding to go on for these reasons, rather than in 13 days saying, well, we're gonna do 6.5% because we gotta pay for the fleet. The public thinks that's it. They fixed the problem, now we're good. And we're gonna have to come back in a couple of years to do the smaller increases, right? So it's good to have the public input and things, but we need to be able to present a pathway, not when I say comprehensive plan, it's all the things you guys are working on that other departments aren't doing. They aren't doing the 60 plus 60.
The silos.
They
and
aren't
all
doing
that
the
stuff,
triggers, right? All the things we've talked about are innovative, and this is why this is so fantastic that we can do it. And we have the people who are willing to do it, rather than established agencies that this is the way we've always done it and it's too much work, right? Like, I love what we're doing and those things are great, but now we, the five of us, need to take it to the public and say, here's how we're gonna marry the two, right? We're working on that service model and all those triggers and things we talked about that are innovative. And now we have a financial model we're gonna marry with it, and like, this is kinda how I described it to Steve the other day. It's not that here's the plan today, it's here's the financial model, here's the service model, and each year we're kinda just trying to line them up a little bit more as things move, right? I mean, making those adjustments so we can get 5 years out, we're that far apart, but every year we're making adjustments to try to get closer to it, right? But we need to communicate that pathway that we're on rather than a one-time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would say it's less than 2 to keep these on level, and Counselor Shields is exactly correct. Through about here is pretty good. Really what this just shows you is your trend. If all else
Everything else
is
stays
equal,
equal.
favorite statistician's line, all else equal, this would be your trend, and there's all sorts of other variables that could change, but we do hold those, and Trevor has a list of the assumptions that we use to hold this, but because they're all the same, it should still give you relative value, and I like the word you used, framework. This is a model that fits into a framework, whereas you get a blueprint, a plan, and you think it's gonna be this. A framework just says it's gonna be a house, and we're gonna figure it out. So I think, we can take what you've said today and give you some ideas, and I do point out, there are no new officers in this. It does start to show you some headroom where you could add. So if we do this, we may say, we may make some arbitrary
To your point, Jared,
times of
in
when they're gonna
2028,
hire.
we need to hire 3 new officers. It's a lot more than 2% a year just to keep that above water.
That's what's hard, yeah, that's what's hard.
And so trying to figure out if it's, we'll do a model where it's just this year. I think keep it flat, show you, it'll be less than 2%, I don't know what that is. But then, as you suggested, there's that model, then it's what if you do it every 3 years? If you do it every 5, and then, sorry, Trevor. We'll take those same models and then add officers periodically and tell you what that would do. There's one to keep it level, and then there's
That's really cool.
one to be able to say, and show the chart, and then you can decide, and again, you know, as you go, you might actually be even okay into year 4, so like, yeah, it's kind of there. Again, then after that, it's really just a trend. If it's going this way, it really doesn't matter how accurate it is, because your trend is likely,
Your trend's the wrong
That way.
direction.
Yeah.
you're on a ski slope,
No,
not a
it's
good way.
time to schedule.
Well, and the reality of all of this is, and I don't need a crystal ball to tell you that, I've done this for 33 years, there is no reality where you don't add cops to the city. Period, end of story.
Right.
Every taxpayer needs to understand that. That's just not a reality. You cannot police 42, and you saw how thin we are. There's no meat on that bone. We're at 0.6, right? And 1,000 per 1,000 is exactly what you said. However, it tells us pretty close to where we are with everybody else, right? There's no reality where we don't have to add cops. Now, we enjoy in Harriman City, and we've talked about this, a highly educated population that is, has means, and they have conflict resolution skills, right? They don't solve things in the front yard with a brick. Typically, they resolve those issues, and so you're seeing your police go to less violent crimes. That's not gonna last forever. That is changing and will continue to change, and we're going to need to address it, and it's not gonna fit in a model. It's gonna fit where the chief that day comes in and goes, uh-oh, guess what? And that's why we built the metrics and triggers. As we start to see those numbers climb, it may not be a fancy line on a chart. It may be Nathan and I going, uh-oh.
But that's that
there's
part
a
where
problem.
as we start to
Something
move,
slipped,
right,
and now we're
one of
doing
those
something.
fingers
So,
is
yeah.
off a little bit, we gotta adjust
Just
as we
know
go.
that the plan we have is a plan. You bring us a plan. This is the plan. That growth silo will be very important to this city in the future. Extremely important. And you'll be able to have some crystal ball to it, right, in a year or two out. But it will tell
Well, that's
us
where I
when we
think
need
it's
to add people.
important to also be innovative in how we're doing the budgeting. So when we talk about fund balance, and I brought this up to you and Nathan and I talked about it a bit, but, and maybe I'm completely out in left field, but new growth, right? So we're saying all things are equal, that means no new houses.
No new houses coming in.
Right? Each
Or
new
schools.
house pays the existing rate everybody else does, and that is new money.
Right.
Right? But every one of those new houses increases the demand and the number of calls.
Right.
So those metrics we have built in and the triggers, well, as that comes in, to me, that new growth money should be set aside. We should be able to have a fund balance for that new growth that goes towards paying for those new officers for that general model. I understand what you're saying is a little different, right, as the types of crimes and things change as we gentrify, et cetera. But for me, that's where we can make some of those adjustments, especially if we have a little bit of foresight and actually budget that money properly instead of using it this year instead of doing that steady, slow increase, which is what we've done. Right.
I think one of the key things, and I hope this supports where Chief was going with this, is there is a moment, having managed communities that have gotten behind, right? If you get behind, which is why we're talking, when you get to 50% committed, we wanna talk about it instead of the 60. Because once you get behind, you will never enforce your way out of that problem.
Chance. It
You
will not happen.
cannot, there's a whole lot of things you
That's
can
its own
do,
compound.
Will not
but it
happen.
becomes a much more expensive, it's.
Then you need 3 cops per 1,000.
It becomes-
Well, it's not even the
Like,
police per thousand, it's okay, you're spending, you're
And
doing
you're
urban renewal,
85%
you're
on
busting
calls
blocks
and
and tearing
90%
stuff down. It just becomes really, one of the things we haven't talked in this, but is that multidisciplinary team with code enforcement, that's an important piece to keep your community in a, it's just important to try and stay ahead, because once you're behind, you're always behind. You are always racing to try and catch up. And
That's where we're at right now, right, Nathan? This is a moment in time we will look back on and say, we're at that point. We can get behind. And that's why, the community services unit was so important to me, to prevent this city and to show that we can do it, to keep ahead of that, in an economical way. And how we marry those together with law enforcement, right?
So it's
But we can look back on this and go, that was the moment we should have moved ahead, and we didn't miss it, because when you miss it, it's done. You're not coming back from that in any sort of economical way anyway, and you're not gonna arrest your way out of it.
I think that is not an easy sell, but I think that's something that's much more easy to show to the public. You know, I haven't talked to anybody that once you actually have a conversation with them and explain the situation, that they don't have an understanding of it. Within the police department, this is
September 29th will be 5 years.
Yeah, I have my little badge on my face, but, 5 years and we've never ever increased what we charge, right?
Yep.
But we've exponentially increased a lot of costs that are associated with it. So it's like, if you look at your own private budget, how much has it gone up in the last 5 years? But you expect first responders never to have an increase? It's unrealistic. And so I think people understand that. People understand primary inflationary adjustments and costs and things like that. I don't think that that's as hard of a sell to people, as long as I agree there needs to be a comprehensive plan. The only negative comments I've ever seen is that you guys don't even have a plan. Well, I think there is a plan. I think that people just simply don't understand it. And as long as we continue to educate, continue to put information out, there'll be a percentage of people who don't care. They're just gonna grumble about it, and I understand that, and that's okay. But I think the majority of people will come along with it because they understand the economics behind having to have employees and people to protect them and cars that they can drive and gas that goes in them and all the.
They enjoy living in this city.
Yeah, exactly,
But
and they also
Doesn't have the
enjoy,
problems the other cities have.
exactly, they enjoy that piece of it and they understand as long as we do a good job of explaining to them. If we get behind, we have the dynamics, and I don't mean to throw us under the bus myself, but we have dynamics in this city with the explosion of multifamily that we have, and I'm not suggesting that brings all the crime. But we have changed the dynamics in our city to where we mirror some of these other cities who do have really high crime rates. And if we get behind on our policing and start to gain that reputation that you can come here and you're not gonna get, if there's no follow-up, you're not gonna get caught, there's not enough policing, we'll be exactly like those cities.
And quite simply, it's a quality of officer and community service officers we have that have kept that at bay.
Well, you made a
That's
comment
just the
about
bottom line.
that we don't hire police officers, you hire peace officers that police our city, and I think that's a motto that needs to be promoted to also, that people need to understand that's the direction we want to always go in, is that we're peace officers that are just policing, that make sure we maintain the peace in our city.
And we police constitutionally and the way that the citizens expect to be policed.
Yeah.
We work within their framework and what they expect, so.
And I think this fits two pillars of our strategic plan, level of community service and then quality of life. I mean, that's huge.
Chief, can I ask you a question on this? It was just a question I had following up after. I know you said, for example, if we approved an officer today in the budget, for example, just hypothetically, if we approved one officer today, you're not seeing that person till January, the earliest?
So there's different ways we hire. If I were to hire somebody off the street, before they're in a police car by themselves, it's about 10 to 11 months, depending on how their FTO progresses, right? Everybody thinks you go to the academy for a couple of weeks and you're a cop. That's not at all true. It's almost a year before they're by themselves in a police car. And there's also up about $100,000 in training that goes into that person. So Chad Miles, Natalie Janea, those people we brought out of the academy. However, if I was to,
No, go ahead.
if I was to hire an officer from West Jordan tomorrow, it would be about, well, we've got to go through, our backgrounds are extensive. They've got to give 2 weeks. We've got job offers we've got to have in place. It's about 2.5 months, 3 months before they're going to be in a car.
And then their FTO, right, for a couple weeks?
Now, they have an expedited FTO. We all now use the same databases. We all use the same policies. So when I take somebody from another agency, all of that is very expeditious, right? I can move through that quickly. But they still have to learn the city. They still have to learn how we police. And that's the key to getting them into our culture and how we police here, is that no matter how experienced they are, they sit with our officers and we say, great, this is how we do it here. And it's a different way. And that's why they also stay, right? They come here for a long time.
And I would say that 10 to 12 months is when you can hire.
That's right.
If you are in a competitive environment where you're actively recruiting and have to work hard to recruit, it can be a while.
Now, we do, and we do have opportunities, because we have people that wanna come here and work. That isn't usual, and that's why other departments have downtime, but we're also very specific, so I have, Isaac left us to go to the U. And he still reserves here. Couldn't find anybody else that would fit into his best, so we just kept him. He gets to stay, and he's really big, and he said, I wanna stay, and I said, that's cool.
But we're gonna get them compact.
Yeah, but we're very specific about who we hire. And so we go through a process that we make sure we get the right person in that seat. So,
The next question.
it is time.
Okay,
It
the
takes
next
time.
one, because we talk about, I'm concerned, to Jared's point, I am concerned about another big tax increase down the road, adding 3 at one point. But if we were to add 1, and I mean, I'm just trying to do, does 1 help at all?
So,
Or
right,
do you need to do 3 at once based on that?
no, we don't have to do anything. I will tell you that at our peak times, we're at saturation.
Right.
Okay, and we know that that's a couple hours in a day. Doesn't mean that for 10 hours we're peaked out and it's completely saturated, but we are becoming saturated at certain hours. And it's weird hours in the city, unlike wherever else I've ever worked. It's 7 in the morning and about 3 to 5 in the evening.
It's not 1:30
Yeah,
when the bars let out.
right, it's different. And we have bars, so we should have that problem, but we don't. They have good drunk conflict resolution skills, I guess. But
Thanks to
what I would say is there's also 2 times in the week that we peak at different ways.
Right.
And as you can imagine, your weekend and early week, or later weekdays, early weekend days are the peaks. So to your point, if you said, here's 1 officer, that probably would go into a peak position, towards the weekend. Zach used to work weekend graves, and he always teased the week graves guys, cause they were never busy compared to the graveyard on weekends. And so the next guy, if you said, oh no, 2, we would bring that person into a peak position for the rest of the week, and because we have AB platoons, right?
So every officer is just helping with one of those
And the
peak.
third one was planned for traffic, because we have peak traffic issues we're starting to experience more and more and more. That one's gonna sneak up on us. And any chief that's ever
Especially with
sat in a
bangers
city
showing
growing like this will tell you, you don't wanna get behind on that either. And they're not, again, these are not a lot of our residents that we're experiencing problems with, because they're bringing their kids to our city to go to our schools.
That's gonna be a problem in January.
It's gonna peak out, right? And over by Mountain Ridge, you guys have seen all the heat maps, you know where the problems are just like I do, right? It's not a surprise to anybody, but that's how we would stage them on. I also don't wanna lose sight of this mental health person. We are seeing an increase. We know that at least 40% of our domestic violence calls aren't really domestic violence, they're mental health related calls. And you guys also see the log I send out every 2 weeks, and the calls in there are based heavily in mental health issues. Not having that person has been a problem for us. They support the officers greatly, because when they have this person that's repeatedly calling, and remember, we've talked about flashpoint calls, we go back and back and back to a mental health call, the likelihood of something terrible happening increases every time we go back. And we were able to offload and defer a lot of these calls to mental health, and the officers weren't going back. We've lost that, and we've seen it get upside down on us a little bit. We are a community has a fairly significant mental health issue.
I mean, our last major incident was mental health.
That's right. There will be several tonight that'll be mental health.
Because it is me.
Yeah, I might be one of them.
That's mine.
I just have to try to
2 out of 5
understand
isn't
the
bad,
timing.
you know?
Does that help you out to understand? And that's why, as Nathan and I talked about order of priority, that's what we came up with. Obviously, the vehicles, we have to be able to get to the call. But I think a mental health worker is super important, and, we're starting to see peak saturation.
And
That's not gonna go away.
I just want to understand if we needed
Yeah.
to do all 3 at once, because that's a concern to me, that'd be another big,
No.
if we did all at once. But I don't want to bring them on sooner than
Cost year 1.
I truly think that if we address our peak shift problems, that the traffic peak isn't gonna go
There's
away,
100.
but we can address
First
that
year and the first year.
by having those other resources in place too. So,
Okay. the budget for the mental health officer.
Is it the full burden though?
Is what-
That's what
I was
he's,
just asking.
Trevor's gonna look in the model with the mental health specialist.
What's your budget?
It's
for
about
the cost?
70,000.
I don't know
But
what
the-
they changed it
but-
to.
I think we bumped it.
Benefits.
But it's with all the,
About-
the fully
The
loaded.
salary for that position was about 48, so it's probably
It was
close to
around-
70 with
Yes,
benefits.
I wanna say it's 80's the number I remember.
I think we
but-
bumped it to 80 to get, well, like everything else, since we lost our mental health worker, the price for them too has gone up.
87.
87.
Okay, yeah.
And then.
And that's a licensed LMT or is it?
It wasn't, what we went for was a case manager. And again, I could give you a long conversation about all of this,
It's
but
like 1% just to pay for.
we don't believe in the embedded program, we believe in the case manager program, and
Yeah,
that's what we wanna employ.
That's what I was asking too.
And fund balance, talk to me about
20%
fund
increase.
balance real fast.
Plus
Where,
future
where,
inflationary
do you have that number as a goal?
So,
So the 2 months expense would be the goal.
Yeah, what is that?
It's whatever the annual expense is, two months worth of that, divided by 12.
Times 6.
Okay,
More
so we are
properties,
divided by 6, that would
percentage
give us the
increases
number,
that way.
I don't know it off the top of my head.
To generate
Best we
the
can
same
do
dollar.
is
Like
We do about
take
12
average
million a year,
33% increase in
More like-
or 9,
Let's
no,
take
it's not
that.
12.
Let's assume
So 24 budget is 9.8.
So
Yeah,
it's
she's
9.8,
9.7.
it's like 1.5 million,
That's
something like
about
that.
1.6 million.
So we,
Right,
to
that's-
get to
that
that
trends happen.
part, then the idea is that you keep that, so you've gotta, I would say it has to grow, and then that's today's dollars, that fund balance. So you'll see some people talk about having a much bigger fund balance in your general fund that's doing a lot. I would suggest we think 2 months is probably okay here, because you're not trying to save up. If you have 100% fund balance, I would argue you're taking too much from your citizens. You're not investing enough back. But that 2 months allows you, if you have something happens and maybe there's a hiccup at the state where we don't get our
It's an
taxes right away, we
Yeah,
have
it's,
some
it's
cash
all
flow.
really, and we'll discuss this actually at the next council meeting, cause I've got the fund balance policy coming. Really, it's about stability, so property tax is very stable, so you need less of a reserve. However, general fund where sales tax is the primary driver, that's a little more volatile, so my recommendation would be 3 months. That's the whole driver between the 2 and the 3 months.
Just, it helps you for those unknowns. I mean, some finance directors, and not Kyle, so I don't want to paint him, but they're more proud of their fund balance, and they forget the fact that you collect those taxes to provide a service. So you have to.
Fund balance is great if you're paying for all the other stuff you have to pay for, right? If you're paying for everything and the fund balance is growing steadily, okay, that's great, you're saving up for rainy day. It's when you're so far behind the 8 ball, you can't catch up, who cares what the fund balance grows at, I mean, that's irrelevant.
That's an interesting dynamic that, I don't know what the GFOA group talks about, but when city managers get together, we talk about that, cause there's always somebody who completely, who always tells them no. Kyle is not, no, he's my reality check.
Did we budget it?
I like. I asked those too.
If I may, I'll just say again, thank you to everyone involved in putting all of this together, like every time we talk about this and you incorporate all of our comments and put it into numbers, words and graphs, it helps, like I've got, as I always do, a whole list of things, I'm like, okay, we've made progress on that, answered some of my questions there. I think we're thinking along the same lines now, I'm one step closer to the next one. I've got it.
And I do say that, just like the fleet thing, whether it's this model, the budgeting tools that we're using, the financial impact tools that we've talked about, it's an iterative process, right? We gotta start somewhere, and this is our first crack, and we're gonna do the best decisions based on the information we have, which is a hell of a lot better than information we had a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago. But it's probably not as good as the information we're gonna have next year or the year after, right? So our decisions will get better because we'll have more and better information.
And I'll just keep hammering the point that the things we're talking about, the growth model of the triggers, looking at the way that we want to run the budget with them is innovative. Nobody else is doing these things. I know that you guys have been making calls to other agencies and things, and I've been told anecdotally that they're like, hey, that's a good idea. What, right? So we are being, I need to do a better job communicating to the public when I do these things, the fact that we are thinking outside the box and we are trying to do things differently to be more, not just innovative, but more efficient with things. So it's not just, the way people, at least the way I've always viewed government and the way it is normally is what I described before, is they want more money and they spend it all and then they come back and want more money. And they just keep doing things the same way as they've always been done. That's why we left who we were with and want to do it differently. And I want to reiterate that we're going to keep doing it differently. We have great people that are here to support us in doing it differently. It's hard work. It's a lot harder to do things differently than it is to just keep doing it the way we've always done it.
That's the right way.
And my hat's off to Cody and Trevor, they've done a ton of work with liquor grow silos and how to match all that together and to just do something that nobody else is doing. And mostly because nobody's growing like we are, right? Even in the entire United States. So hats off to these guys, a lot of work.
Oh yeah, just that one other little factor on top of everything else,
Everything
yeah.
else.
Wait till we get an HDRZ zone and
You mean
transfer
the
factor and everything else.
Can I ask a question real quick? Obviously, for the 22nd, we were planning to have some presentation material for the financial model. Do you want presentation material for public consumption on the growth silo model and the service model as well? Or do you wanna keep those two separate? We just wanna be prepared going into that meeting on the 22nd.
I think you should have that information for the open house part. I don't know if you need to go through it in detail in the general meeting.
I think that's part of the plan. I think it shows that
I
we're
agree.
thinking outside of the box and we've got a model that's nationally recognized and that's,
How do we know when it's the right time to
Yeah.
hire another officer?
just read a 26-page paper. You can figure it out.
I'd say have it all ready to pull up, so if we start discussing and we wanna reference one of those charts, we can pull it up so people can see it maybe.
We can put them on some boards too.
But I agree with that, public consumption for the open house and more condensed for us, and then we can go back to some of that.
Well, and the goal is transparency. We want everybody to know what we're doing and how we're doing it and why. So,
Well, closed, what's, just one?
Where'd Todd go?
He's out with-
He's out with.
Mr. Church.
Oh, yeah, we do have, an
I
update
thought we were going home.
with
No,
Mr.
you got a
some of
shiny piece of
our-
paper in front of you.
know better.
Some of our,
And then we probably have one other thing to add under C two.
Okay, then you make the motion.
Okay, alright.
It's already being announced, but
Oh, did you wanna talk about that personnel thing?
so we have C, he's got checked already. I don't think there was anything else.
Yeah, I only know, it's just the one litigation.
Okay, for a motion.
Motion to adjourn the work meeting.
I'll make a motion to temporarily recess the city council meeting to go into closed meeting for the following purposes, providing new testing code and safety procedures for code 5 or strategy session to discuss pending or regional internet litigation.
Okay. Second? Second by Teddy, Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yeah.
Steve?
yes.
Gary?
Sure.
Okay, so we will have, can I spell that? Yes, 5 votes, yeah. So we need, who do we need in here, just Councilman Todd,
And maybe
city manager, Blake?
I don't know which piece of